The scanner returned the result in less than 2 seconds, which is what it is designed to do. It is designed to be fast because fast is what triage requires. You sweep a new arrival, the instrument reads their thermal signature, and in 2 seconds you know whether the person in front of you needs a gate escort to the transit lounge or a gurney to the emergency ward. 2 seconds is not enough time to make a mistake. I have run 11,000 intake scans at Kerville Crossing and the instrument has not given me a result I did not trust. I trusted this one. That was the problem. The human had come through on the Ardith line connector, a mid-range transit route that passes through 4 systems before it reaches Kerville. She was adult, female by her own documentation, traveling alone under a standard passenger permit. She sat on the intake bench with her bag on her knees, watching me set up the scanner the way passengers always watch, the faint impatience of someone who has done this at enough transit hubs to find the process tedious. She was not distressed. She was not perspiring. Her color, such as I could read it on a human face, appeared normal. There was nothing wrong with her. I could see that with my own eyes. The scanner disagreed. The thermal return came back at 40.3. In Velthary physiology, 40.3 is a medical emergency. In every species I have ever processed through this bay, the Kerville Transit Hub serves 11 catalogued species on a regular rotation. 40.3 surface core equivalent is a number that appears in the literature under the heading critical hyperthermia, in the subsection that begins with the words "do not delay transport." I have seen that number twice in 11 years of intake work. Both times, the patient was already losing consciousness. This patient was asking me if the scan was going to take much longer. I ran it again. 40.1. The fractional difference was within instrument tolerance. The result was the same result. I told her, as calmly as I could, that the initial reading showed an elevated thermal signature and that I needed to run a secondary confirmation before we could proceed to transit clearance. She said that was fine and shifted her bag from one knee to the other. I pulled the contact thermometer from the kit and asked if I could take a direct reading from her wrist. She extended her arm without question. The contact probe takes 3 seconds. I watched the display. It returned 40.2. I have a protocol for this. Everyone in intake medicine has a protocol for this, because the moment when an instrument confirms an emergency reading is the moment when the temptation is to look for reasons the instrument is wrong rather than act on what it is telling you. The protocol says, act on what it is telling you. I opened a channel to the duty officer station and reported a possible critical hyperthermic presentation in Bay 7. I asked Medic Yanera, my junior colleague who was running intakes in Bay 8, to step over and assist. The patient, who had heard all of this, looked at me with an expression I did not have a good framework for. It was not fear. It was not confusion, exactly. It was the expression of a person who has been told something that does not match their internal information and is taking a moment to decide which source to trust. She said, "How high?" I told her. 40.2 on contact thermometry. She said, "That's normal. That's just what I run." I noted that in the session log and continued with the protocol, because that is what the protocol is for, and because the alternative, standing in Bay 7 arguing with a patient about what her own body temperature means, is not a procedure I have ever been trained to run. People in the early stages of a significant fever sometimes feel entirely normal. The body's subjective sense of its own temperature is not a reliable instrument. I asked her if she had any history of thermal regulation disorders. She said no. I asked if she had experienced any recent illness, injury, or unusual environmental exposure. She said no. I asked how long she had been feeling well. She looked at me for a moment and said, with what I can only describe as careful patience, that she was currently feeling fine and had been feeling fine for the last several years, insofar as she could recall. Yanera came in from Bay 8. I showed her the readings. She read them twice and then looked at the patient with the expression that I had probably been wearing for the last several minutes. I decided to do something that is not in the protocol because the protocol assumes that the examiner's body and the subject's body are calibrated against the same baseline. I held out my hand, palm up, and asked the patient if I could touch her arm directly, without the probe. She said yes and rested her forearm across my palm. Velthary hands are sensitive to radiated heat. It is a navigational adaptation. We can read thermal gradients in an environment the way some species read air pressure, and we use it without thinking, the way you use any sense you have had your entire life. I know what a fever feels like. I know the particular quality of heat that comes off a body that is producing more warmth than it should, the slight unevenness of it, the way it has a source and a direction. Her arm was warm the way a stone is warm after a full day in the sun. Evenly. Thoroughly. From the inside out, with no variation and no center, as if the heat were not a symptom but simply a property of the material. I held that contact for longer than was strictly necessary for assessment. I was thinking. Or trying to think. What I was actually doing, I suspect, was recalibrating something that had been certain in me a moment before and was no longer certain. The instrument had been right. The protocol had been right. My training had been right. Everything had been right except the assumption underneath all of it, the assumption that a body producing that much heat must be a body in distress. I released her arm and stepped back and opened a query to the Velthary Medical Auxiliary Central Database. I asked it for the recorded baseline thermal signatures of human subjects on file, all entries, sorted by surface core equivalent. The query returned in 11 seconds. There were 407 entries. The mean baseline surface core equivalent for a healthy adult human at rest was 40.1. The range across all entries, from lowest to highest, was 38.6 to 40.8. Every single entry in the database had previously been flagged, at the point of first contact with a Velthary or compatible medical instrument, as a possible emergency hyperthermic presentation. Every single flag had subsequently been reclassified as baseline normal for species. There was a notation at the bottom of the database entry, added by the Auxiliaries Records Office at some point in the last decade, that read, "Human thermal baseline regularly triggers emergency intake protocol in species with core temperatures below 37.5. Recommend intake facilities serving human passengers update calibration thresholds accordingly." I looked at the patient. She had taken a small book out of her bag and was reading it. I closed the emergency channel to the duty officer station. I told Yanera that the reading was consistent with documented human baseline and that no further intervention was required. I completed the transit clearance form and handed it to the patient and told her she was clear to proceed to the lounge. She put her book away and thanked me and picked up her bag. At the door she paused and turned back. She said she hoped she hadn't caused any trouble. She said this happened sometimes. She said she'd learned to mention it up front but had forgotten, and she was sorry about that. I told her it was no trouble. She left. I stood in Bay 7 for a while after that. The next intake was waiting at the desk. I was aware of that. I was also aware of the reading still on the contact thermometer display, which I had not cleared yet. 40.2. The number that had, 8 minutes ago, meant something was badly wrong. The number that now meant nothing was wrong at all. I cleared it and went to the desk. I added a note to my personal file that evening, not to the official session log. It said only this, that I had touched a healthy human being and felt, in my own hand, a heat I would have called dangerous. That she had felt nothing unusual. That it had been, for her, a perfectly ordinary afternoon. I have been a field medic for 11 years. I am accustomed to the body as a problem to be read. I am not certain I was prepared for the body as a furnace that does not know it is burning.